You know what they say, it's never too early to celebrate the summer, especially when we have such an exciting one to look forward to. Hello everyone, Soberoni of Jeanne Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for your Eternal Son and local dolphin expert, Jeanne the Arc Archer. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers and how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 5-star servants. So without further ado, let's take a look at Jeanne's stats. Jeanne has a max HP of 15,743 and a max attack of 10,525, which becomes 9,998 due to her Archer class modifier. When it comes to the Archer class, Jeanne has by far the largest HP stat, although she also has the lowest attack stat among all 5-star archers, being the only archer in her rarity with below 11,000 attack. Compared to the other 5-star servants as a whole, Jeanne Archer retains one of the highest HP stats, but also has one of the lowest attack stats for any 5-star servant. Jeanne's stat spread is heavily defensive, which is usually more in line with supports and tanks. Taking a look at her skills, Jeanne's first skill is Endless FGO Summer rank A. It increases her own arts card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30% depending on level, and it also applies invincibility for 2 hits lasting for 3 turns. Her second skill is Holy Maiden of the Waterside Dolphin rank A+. It increases her NP gauge between 20 and 40%. It also increases her NP strength for 3 turns between 10 and 20%. And when she's near the water side, it increases her crit strength for 3 turns between 30 and 50%, all depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Servant Cheer rank B. It increases the attack of all allies for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, and further increases the attack of all good allies except herself between 10 and 20% for 3 turns, all depending on level. For her passives, Jeanne has Magic Resistance rank B, which increases her debuff resist by 17.5%, and Independent Action Celebrity rank EX. This increases her crit strength by 10%, and further increases her NP gauge by 3% when she's near the water. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Jeanne has an Arts Buster deck with Quick Arts Buster Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Deocean de Algrese, which deals heavy damage to all enemies with between a 450 and 750% damage modifier depending on level, and it also grants her between 10 and 30 crit stars per turn for 3 turns depending on overcharge. Taking a closer look at her cards, we see that her quick card hits 4 times, her arts hits twice, her buster card hits 2 times, and her extra attack hits 5 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.68% and a star rate of 8%. This equates to below average NP gain due to the low hit counts on her arts card, but some good star generating from her high hit counts on her quick and extra cards, as well as the overcharge effect on her Noble Phantasm. Jeanne Archer also requires a wide range of materials for her ascension and skill leveling. Firstly, if you're hoping to ascend her, you're going to be needing 8 Eternal Frost, 10 Seashells, 15 Aurora Steels, and 5 Scarabs. Eternal Frost can be farmed at Yaga Moscow in Lost Belt 1 with a 45% drop rate. Seashells have a 40% drop rate at the Observatory in Babylonia. Aurora Steel can be farmed at the Castle of Ice and Snow in Lost Belt 2 with a 38% drop rate. And finally, Scarabs drop at the Great Temple in Camelot with a 12% drop rate. But that's not all. Each of Jeanne Archer's skills also requires an additional 15 Seashells, 15 Eternal Frost, 20 Phoenix Plumes, and 10 Divine Wines. The Phoenix Plumes are best farmed at the Town Hall in Salem, where they have a 35% drop rate, while the Divine Wine can be farmed at the Palace of the Dragon King in Agartha with a 12% drop rate. What's this? A 5-star archer that isn't an AoE buster? 10 out of 10 gameplay design already. Aside from breaking the Archer mold, Jeanne Archer also has a lot of other things going for her, although it may not seem that way at first glance. She does have a gargantuan HP stat, one of the highest in the game, but stat-wise, that's about the only thing that she has going for her. Her attack is unfortunately one of the worst for any 5-star servant, and although she does have some good star generating, it may come as a surprise to know that her base NP gain is subpar. But while her stats may seem lopsided on paper, Jeanne has several hidden weapons in her skill set that help her perform much more effectively. First and foremost, she has two very strong skills that help her combat her initial lackluster NP gain: Endless Enjoy Summer and Holy Maiden of the Waterside. Endless Summer is a 30% arts buff that also comes packaged with a 2-hit invincibility. Normally, combining a defensive and offensive ability into one skill is counterproductive. However, in this case, it does work very well. The invincibility is a mini protection from arrows effect that lasts for a full 3 turns, so even when you use this skill offensively, Jeanne is still very likely to get full use out of the invincibility. However, the star of the skill is the arts buff, as it more than makes up for her initial poor NP gain. And due to the very short cooldown on the skill, it's easy to have this buff active for most of the battle. So in practice, her NP gain is rarely an issue. But in case that weren't enough, Holy Maiden of the Waterside also gives Jeanne access to a very potent 40% NP charge, allowing her to Noble Phantasm very quickly and early in a battle. This is especially good for farming, as she can Noble Phantasm immediately when using craft essences like Imaginary Element, or even craft essences that give a 50% starting charge, provided that you have a support or mystic code that can give her the extra 10%. If you're using this skill on a stage with water, it can also give Jeanne a sizable crit buff, although this will rarely come into play. But what does come into play is the Noble Phantasm damage buff that this also gives, and it stacks multiplicatively with the arts buff from Endless Summer to help give your Noble Phantasm some extra punch. And speaking of punch, Jeanne has one final skill that can really elevate the team's damage: Servant Cheer. Essentially, this is a charisma that has the added benefit of double buffing any good servants, excluding herself. A 20% attack buff is good enough, and it does help make up for Jeanne's lack of damage on her face cards, but what really sells this skill is just how massive the buff is to good aligned servants, of which there are a ton. Much like with Maeve and Liz's charisma skills, Jeanne's charisma skill alone transforms her into an excellent DPS support for most teams due to its huge power boost, wide range of coverage, and low cooldown. All 3 of Jeanne's skills are excellent, but I recommend leveling up Holy Maiden first, as the Noble Phantasm charge is essential and the skill has very good scaling, followed by Endless Summer for some more consistent NP gain, and then Servant Cheer last. Jeanne's Noble Phantasm is an AoE arts attack that also gives her passive star generating for 3 turns. A very simple but highly effective Noble Phantasm. Firstly, the overcharge effect is great. Even at just 100% overcharge, this is going to give Jeanne a free max limit broken 2030 for 3 turns, which is useful for supporting crit teams or even for supporting her own NP gain due to her high star weight. But most importantly, as an AoE Noble Phantasm, this is great for farming, and because it also has a good amount of hits, it's going to refund a lot of NP charge when your arts buff is active, which sets up some easy NP looping strategies. And this is where we get to Jeanne's core strength. She is an NP spamming monster. Much like with Artoria Archer, Jeanne Archer is able to refund a large portion of her NP bar whenever she Noble Phantasms. This, combined with her high uptime arts buff, her NP charge, and her consistent crits from her star generating, means that she's a one-woman Noble Phantasm machine, and she can spam out her Noble Phantasm endlessly all on her own. And when combined with good art support, she can even loop very easily. All of this combines to make her arguably the best arts farming servant around, at least for now. Farming is far from Jeanne's only use though. As mentioned earlier, she is a strong DPS support for any good aligned servants, and is capable of highly consistent star generating due to her Noble Phantasm's overcharge effect. It's also worth noting that Jeanne Archer is incredibly self-sufficient, as she can fuel her own NP spam, supply her own stars for critting, and she's insanely tanky due to her high HP and low cooldown invincibility. So even if you're lacking in top tier supports, Jeanne can more than carry her own weight. Jeanne Archer's only real major weakness is her lack of damage. Despite all of her skills being damage buffs, her attacks will still hit like wet pool noodles, and even her fully buffed NP is among the weakest in the Archer class, for her rarity. While Jeanne is highly self-sufficient, she still works best when she's surrounded by the proper allies, which in this case is mostly other art servants. Jeanne can perform two roles very effectively. She can be a farmer or she can be a support. If you're going to use her for farming, then make sure that you pair her with other art servants who can enhance her arch card effectiveness or her NP gain, so that you can get a much better refund on your Noble Phantasm. Supports like Castor Gil, Nero Bride, and Paracelsus. Castor Gil's arts buff really helps her out with NP gain, and his star generating buff pairs perfectly with her role as a crit support. Additionally, Jeanne's charisma works on Gil as well, and he can provide her with a charisma of his own to really bolster the team's overall DPS. Bride also has a fantastic NP gain skill that later becomes an NP charge and easily enables looping for Jeanne. Paracelsus is the best free-to-play option as he has two very strong skills for buffing Jeanne's NP gain. If you want to use Jeanne as more of a DPS support, then pair her with other good aligned servants, especially ones that rely on crit damage like Holmes, Mordred Rider, and Shiki. Holmes makes fantastic use of the crit stars that Jeanne generates, and the low cooldown charisma buffs help him out with more consistent damage. Mordred Rider is another NP spammer, but as a rider, she can make easy use of Jeanne's stars, and the two of them together make for some good farming strats. And Shiki is a good option for boss fights as she is a very good single target DPS, which is only made better from the double charisma buff. Jeanne's Bondcraft Essence is Sea Angel. It buffs the arch card effectiveness and NP strength of all allies by 10%. Not a bad choice if you're using Jeanne as more of a support. If you're farming though, I highly recommend using craft essences that give starting NP charge and, if possible, an arts buff. Craft essences like Kaleidoscope, Imaginary Element, Dive to Blue, and Painting Summer. For a support role, I recommend using craft essences that help with star generating like 2030, Demonic Bodhisattva, and His Rightful Place. In the future, there are two craft essences I recommend looking out for, depending on what role you want Jeanne to perform. Sign of a Smiling Face is ideal for pure DPS as it buffs NP gain, NP damage, and arch card effectiveness, while Annual Meeting is great for support since it passively generates stars every turn while also buffing your NP gain and your arch card effectiveness. Overall, Jeanne Archer is a tremendously versatile servant. She is among the best farmers in the game due to her ability to NP spam and loop with very little setup required. She is a strong DPS support thanks to her servant cheer skill and her consistent star generating, and she's tanky and self-sufficient enough to not require much support, which makes her a good pickup for free-to-play and newer players. She is, however, seriously lacking when it comes to damage, and she is very NP spam reliant. If she can't continuously fire off her Noble Phantasm, then her usefulness becomes highly limited. But those are downsides that are very easily compensated for, and at the end of the day, there is just no denying Jeanne's capabilities, so she gets an A+ from me. While Jeanne may not be as outright powerful as Gil or Ishtar, what she lacks in strength, she makes up for in sheer versatility. Having a servant that's not only a top tier farmer, but also a damn good support and tank is just too valuable to pass up. And those are my thoughts on Jeanne Archer. I know that BB is probably going to be the hot pick of the summer, but remember, summers are fleeting and Onesans are eternal. But let me know what you think in the comments down below and if you plan on rolling for her. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.